I will. Is that, and then what about you?
Oh, I'm just here.
I've got
All right, so tally lamps on.
It's a nice day.
Red dot. Red dot, upper left-hand corner.
Okay.
That's drinking very fast. We've gone down the mic. I'm going to grab extra battery. We may switch batteries midterm.
Old school with the map.
That's the question.
Oh, yeah.
I had no luck whatsoever.
We're going to move my car. I'll be back in a moment.
Great. But fortunately, there wasn't a huge quantity of bacteria, but still, they were there.
How optimistic are you this problem being solved?
Just our presentation.
It is a little red light against your
Oh my God. Well, I'm
We're wasting that much time.
How are you doing this morning? How are you doing this morning? Good? Good? I know, it's another beautiful day.
We're live.
Another
We are.
beautiful day. I was going to say,
I'm gonna have it, I've only used mine once.
expecting the rain show.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Boy, that was louder than I thought. Excuse me for that. Welcome to the forum on Monday, March 30th. Today we have a really interesting program. Before we get into that, just a fast question. How many of you, out of the 10,000 that I'm seeing, how many of you folks are on Twitter? On Twitter.
single one.
I'm on it, but I don't.
I am considering the age group, which is why I'm asking rather than assuming. Okay, so I think I saw half of the hand, one hand, got it. All right, because I've just gone on Twitter on behalf of the forum, and we'll see if that reaches an even broader audience. Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to talk about something that's pretty pervasive in our community. I'm not even sure how pervasive, but I'm looking forward to learning. We're going to talk about wood smoke, and we have two people presenting today. We have a gentleman from the county, and I'll introduce him just a little bit later. But first, allow me to introduce Chris, and I hope I don't mess up your name, Hegerbaumer? All right. Chris is the director of the Oregon Environmental Council, deputy director, pardon me. I don't have the power to promote, and I am sorry about that, but perhaps about us. We have an exceptionally smart lady who doesn't enjoy the concept of being the number one. Ladies and gentlemen, without further moments, let me introduce Chris Hegerbaumer from the Oregon Environmental Council. Thank you.
Well, I really appreciate being invited here to speak today. I was invited by Spencer Ehrman, so thank you, Spencer. So again, I'm Deputy Director at Oregon Environmental Council. And for those of you who don't know us, okay, the little things didn't work, so let's try this. No, that didn't work either. I tried that.
Jump in. My apologies. Did this already.
Purely executive function, right?
There you go.
Seems like we're gonna really know her name for the next 20 minutes.
Okay, well, I will just say, so Oregon.
It's working.
All right. Now, so Oregon Environmental Council, we were established in 1968. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works statewide. We're membership-based, and the types of issues we work on are really where there's a nexus between public health and the environment. We work at 3 levels to help folks like you and me live greener lives. We work with businesses, with farmers, with health professionals to incorporate sustainability into their operations. And our primary function is working with elected officials to create practical policies, primarily at the state level, that protect people's health. Our mission is to advance innovative, collaborative solutions to Oregon's environmental challenges for today and future generations. And our major goals include climate protection, clean and plentiful water, and toxic-free environments. In fact, we do not want toxics in our air, so therefore I'm here today to talk to you about air quality. I sort of geeked out a little bit in putting this presentation together. I found this incredible timeline on our Oregon Department of Environmental Quality's website. It starts in 1889, and it basically details a variety of environmental milestones or environmental progress over that course of more than 100 years. And the first place that I found mention of air quality was in 1951, when the state actually created an air pollution authority and started to regulate something called wigwam burning. I'm going to not talk about everything on this timeline, but I'm going to ask who remembers this Black Tuesday in 1969. What was it about? Anybody here?
Was it fuel burning?
Exactly. So that is the day that there was a huge pileup of 12 vehicles near Eugene and a pedestrian killed in Eugene because of the field burning just took away all visibility. It was a very serious issue, and then it's kind of basically what started some regulatory steps towards regulating field burning. And then in 1970, we had the Federal Clean Air Act was passed. And that indeed is the same year that the EPA was set up at the federal level. This was back at a time where I think that the environment was actually a less partisan issue. And the Federal Clean Air Act was created, and it began regulating several pollutants. Can anyone in the audience hazard a guess at what pollutants are regulated under the National Ambient Air Quality Standards?
Carbon, ozone.
Ozone?
Carbon,
Not mercury?
carbon dioxide.
No.
Particulates?
Particulates and ozone. Lead.
Carbon monoxide.
No. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrous dioxide are the pollutants that are regulated, and basically communities around the country have to reduce levels if they are above a certain line. And so that's what we're gonna get into one of those pollutants in particular today. So the first, on this timeline on DEQ's website, the first time wood smoke is mentioned on that timeline is in 1973. There was something called the Portland Aerosol Study that really identified wood smoke as an issue for air quality. And in 1983, I'm happy to say that my organization, Oregon Environmental Council, was involved with this. There was a first in the nation law that said that we needed to use better stoves, so certified stoves that were cleaner than the old stoves. And that actually, the EPA at the federal level took that on and made it nationwide. So that was an exciting example of a state being a laboratory for democracy. Then in 1990, I'm going to mention this issue of air toxics. So the federal government, notice I only mentioned, what was that, 6 air quality pieces that are really, really well regulated by the federal government. But there are a whole host of what are called air toxics or hazardous air pollutants. Mercury is one of those. That there's a list of 188, and these pollutants have either carcinogenic properties, or they can impact reproductive health over the course of one's life, or they can also lead to developmental problems for kids. So they're just nasty, nasty chemicals that are not regulated in the same way but are a cause for concern. And I mention this because wood smoke does emit certain air toxics. So moving on down the timeline, in 2010, actually 2009, legislation was passed that sets up the Heat Smart wood stove removal program. I'll talk about that a little bit more. In 2013, City Club of Portland did a report on air toxics, and it found that really wood smoke is a top concern for air toxics. And in 2014, I realize this is a Portland-based rather than here, but a survey was done by DEQ that found that 1/3 of Portlanders burn wood, and 5% of those folks, it's their sole heating source. So who in the room has a wood stove or a fireplace? That is about half of the room. Anybody use it as their sole heating source here? Ah, very interesting. All right. Okay, so moving on. We have actually come a long way on air quality. And if you think about if anybody comes from a place like Denver or LA, think of what the air was like in the 1970s. So, and in Oregon, we are now below federal health standards for carbon monoxide, NO2, SO2, lead, and particulate matter 10. So, and we've been trending down for some time, and this is really due to good programs that have reduced that air quality. It's also due to the fact that the cars that we drive are much cleaner than they used to be. There are some concerns still about air quality. We are in attainment of standards for smog or ground level ozone, which means that we're not exceeding the levels that would be considered dangerous all across the state, but there are studies out there that say there's really no safe level of smog in the air, and it's something that we have to continue to be cognizant of and work to keep those levels down. The two areas that are really of greatest concern include fine particulate matter, and I'll get into what that is a little bit more, and these air toxics that I mentioned earlier. So this is a graph or an infographic from the American Lung Association, and it shows what the health impacts are both of ozone, so that's the smog, and of particulate pollution, which is also sometimes people call it soot. What's interesting about this graphic, I think, is that the particulate pollution has like every single one of these health impacts, and ozone pollution just a few less. But it ranges everything from premature death to cardiovascular harm, etc., etc. These air toxics that I mentioned, again, there's 188 that have been identified. They include things everybody here is familiar with, like benzene, arsenic, diesel, lead. PAHs are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And these air toxics are found at or above health benchmarks in many places in Oregon. The sources of these are our cars, diesel trucks, any kind of burning. Basically, combustion creates pollution. So that includes fireplaces and wood stoves. Businesses like dry cleaners, or like when you go and get your nails done, there's some air toxics that are emitted related to that. Also, big industry to some extent, and even consumer products that are off-gassing. Those are all sources of air toxics. Greenhouse gases, somebody mentioned carbon dioxide. And at least when the Clean Air Act was initially put in place, nobody understood what carbon dioxide was doing to our climate. It is something now that the EPA is getting very involved in. We have a lot of programs at the state level to deal with our greenhouse gas emissions. And when you think about the source of greenhouse gas emissions, so let's say carbon dioxide, many of the same sources of carbon dioxide are also sources of these traditional air pollutants. Interestingly, with climate change, we're going to see that it exacerbates certain air quality problems. So in the summertime, smog is created by a mixture of gases in the air and heat. Heat is necessary to form smog. So with climate change, when we have more intense summer times, we're going to see more smog. And we'll also see more wildfires, which is another source of air pollution in the state. So particulate matter is what we're here to talk about today, getting deeper and deeper. Particulate matter can come in basically any shape or size, and it can be solid particles or liquid droplets. And it's divided into two groups. The bigger particles are PM10, and let me look at my notes here to get this perfectly correct. So the PM10 is about 25 to 100 times thinner than a human hair, whereas PM2.5 is 100 times thinner than human air. And so it's very, very teeny tiny. You breathe it deeply into your lungs, and unfortunately it often carries some of these air toxics along with it as you breathe. So there's a number of health effects. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but suffice it to say that there are both respiratory impacts and cardiovascular impacts, and there are certain vulnerable populations. Anyone who has a breathing problem or a heart problem, children, elderly people are all at risk, and I can't actually think of a single community in Oregon that doesn't include people like that. So it's important to reduce the sources of particulate matter pretty much everywhere. So this is so, I have a hard time even explaining this, so maybe Matt or John is going to have to help me. But basically, the federal government says, in order to meet the PM 2.5 standards for your community, you've got to look both at peak or short-term emissions as well as long-term emissions. So the 24-hour standard is saying that you can't get above 35 micrograms per meter cubed, all right? Or within the 98th percentile of that at any point during the year. And then the annual standard is saying you really got to keep that below 50 micrograms per meter cubed on average over time. It's a rolling average, a 3-year rolling average. And that short term is meant to deal with the immediate impacts to people's health, and then the other one is dealing with those more chronic impacts to people's health. And I will say that this 2006 that was strengthened by the federal government, so we have to meet a stricter standard. When the EPA does develop new standards, pollution standards, it's basically required to look at, it's kind of a cost-benefit analysis. And this is a huge list of what they felt that meeting these new standards would actually do to protect people's health. So there's all sorts of ways that it's going to keep people healthier and also help reduce missed days at work and so on from sickness. So in Oregon, this is a map of areas where we have had problems with air quality and where we're doing well. So the green stars stand for areas that have had problems with ozone and or PM 2.5, but they have brought those levels down below the level of concern, and they have plans in place. These are called maintenance plans to meet the standards over the long run. The black triangles are 2 areas of the state where they are not meeting the PM 2.5 standard. The gray triangle down in Lakeview and Prineville are areas where they could be deemed as being out of compliance, so a non-maintenance area, or there's another word for it. Non-attainment, thank you. And then the white triangle is, there's only one white triangle on here, oops, and Hillsborough, which is why we're here today. So there's a couple of areas where, the monitoring is showing that there are some problems here. So Department of Environmental Quality and Lane Regional Air Pollution Authority, which is the Eugene, Springfield to Oak Ridge area, are working to deal with the PM 2.5 issues. So what are the main culprits when it comes to this very fine, tiny particulate matter? Wood stoves, major source. And that's really a wintertime phenomenon. And then wildfires, well, that's really more of a summertime phenomenon. I would say we have more control over wood stoves than we do over wildfires. Certainly we can do some things to reduce wildfire risk, but wood stoves, we can do more. And then particulate particulate matter also comes from combustion cars and trucks, and to a lesser extent from industrial processes. What's in the smoke coming out of your chimney? These particulates, carbon monoxide, a variety of toxic organic gases, nitrogen oxides, and they also even form dioxins in the air. So very interestingly, we're all quite aware of how cigarette smoke is a danger to our health and to the health of people around us if we're smoking. EPA estimates that a single fireplace operating for an hour and burning 10 pounds of wood will generate 4,300 times more carcinogenic PAHs than 30 cigarettes. So it is indeed a problem. What are the health impacts? I'll stop here and actually detail them. Reduced lung function in the short term, as well as worsening existing lung diseases, aggravated heart disease, increased risk of lower respiratory diseases, in the short term, irritation to eyes, lungs, throat, and sinuses, and even triggering headaches and allergies. And then the long-term exposure can lead to chronic lung disease, chronic bronchitis, and the increased risk of cancer, which relates to those air toxics that we were talking about. I think many of us think, oh, it's going out the chimney, out into the community, outdoor air, it's just an outdoor air problem. It's actually also an indoor air problem. So several studies have looked at pollution increases inside the home. And we've got increases of 26% for the fine particulates inside the home, 29% for benzene, and up to 400% for these polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that I mentioned. So around the state, we've got our State Department of Environmental Quality, LRAPA, which does the air pollution work, again, in the lower Willamette Valley, and then counties like Washington County who are working to try to address this issue. And I think it's a tough one to address because, well, there's a culture of wood burning. We all love sitting around the fire. It's very comfy, the wood stove. And for some folks, it is the sole source of heating. And in fact, in Oak Ridge, there is no natural, you can't get natural gas to heat your home. So a lot of people are very dependent on wood stoves. Also, it can be a cheaper source of heating. So it's a tough thing to work on, which is why we've got smart people at the county who are trying to think of ways to deal with it. So there are voluntary programs, public awareness campaigns. There is some money available to help people switch to cleaner stoves. And actually, remember back in 1983 when I talked about having the certified wood stoves, EPA just passed a regulation that technology changes all the time, right? And now we have even better technology to reduce pollution from stoves. And so all new wood stoves and also a bunch of other wood heating devices will be cleaner. But, people can have these things in their home for a long, long time. The Heat Smart program actually requires, if you sell your home and you have an uncertified device, you have to take it out, you have to completely scrap it. And so that we're getting rid of those worse pieces of equipment. Unfortunately, sometimes they still end up on Craigslist. So that's a problematic. That is illegal to sell the wood stove on Craigslist. There are times when the air is so bad in certain places like Lakeview or Oak Ridge that there are burn bans. And if it is your sole source, you can continue heating your home, but they're asking for people to not pollute the air on those days. So I'm going to stop there and pass things on to Matt, who will get into much more detail about what's going on in your community.
Thank you very much, Chris. And as far as our community, Washington County, we've got Matt Davis from Washington County Public Health. Matt, after Matt's presentation, there'll be time for questions. As a reminder, only forum members can ask questions. And as one last reminder, notice how quiet those servers are. Don't forget to tip. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Davis from Washington County Public Health.
you on the phone somewhere. I'll see if I can wrangle him if you can't make it work, Pat.
I have it in my bag also.
It was supposed to be foolproof.
Zip drive.
I didn't come here for that.
That's what the question period is for.
Yeah, I guess so.
As you know, all these.
Is it working?
Got it. Alright, sorry about that.
Microphone's right here.
So good afternoon, thanks for having me. Again, my name is Matt Davis. I work for Washington County in the Department of Health and Human Services. I first wanted to thank Chris for the great introduction to the issue, and also just OEC, Oregon Environmental Council's work on the issue in general. They've been really great to work with over the years. So I think what I'd like to do in the next 20 minutes or so is kind of talk a little bit more about what's going on in Hillsborough and Washington County. I have a lot of data and charts and graphs to share with you, and I recognize that it might be overwhelming, but I'll take it slow, and I'm also, I'll be around afterwards to look at any of them in more detail with you. I also have copies of my presentation on the back table, or I can email them to you if you're really a numbers person and want to get into the details. And in addition to sharing kind of what's going on in the community right now, I want to talk a little bit about what the county did this last winter and our plans to work on wood smoke moving forward. So last summer, the Department of Environmental Quality, who's in charge of tracking what's going on in the air, alerted Washington County officials that they were seeing kind of an uptick in the PM 2.5, the particulate matter pollution that Chris talked about. And that started a series of conversations about, you know, what was going on, where was the problem coming from, and how do we deal with it. This is a map just showing the two air monitoring stations that are here in Washington County. So one's in Beaverton and one is out near our office in Hillsborough. These two monitors are responsible for kind of giving us a picture of what's going on in the air in Washington County. And if, I can share pictures later, but air monitoring stations, they just kind of look like a little camping trailer with some, I don't know, they almost look like chimneys, oddly enough, coming out the top that are collecting air and assessing it for different types of pollutants. So this is the first big chart I want to walk through with you. And I'm really focusing on the red line on the right-hand side of the screen. So the red dashed line is the standard for PM 2.5 that Chris talked about, the standard that we should not be going over in order to protect our health. And you'll see that the two arrows are pointing to 2 years, 2011 and 2013. And in those years, our annual average for the 24-hour standard, that's the one that is measuring the kind of peaks like Chris talked about, we went over the level, exceeded the standard for both of those years. Chris also mentioned that it's a 3-year rolling average, and if you look at 2012, it was quite a bit lower than the standard. So when you look at our 3-year average, we're still below the federal standard, but we're kind of creeping up over the years. And I'll talk a little bit about why you can see such variation from year to year in this particular standard. What else about this? The blue lines are the annual standard, the ones that measure just kind of our general day-to-day levels, and we typically have not had a problem meeting that standard here in Oregon. So that map was, or that graph was of particulate matter pollution, and like Chris mentioned, particulate pollution comes from a number of sources: wood smoke, cars and trucks, forest fires. There's a whole list, but there's other data that are kind of suggesting to us that this is really a wood smoke issue. Our air quality problem is a wood smoke issue, and I want to walk through some of those sources. So the first is the Department of Environmental Quality performs what they call an emissions inventory, and that's just an assessment of what's out in the air, and it helps them attribute the air pollution to different sources. And they do that statewide and for local communities. And here in Washington County, their emissions inventory, which is based on those monitors and other sources, show that about 30% of our PM 2.5 issues is coming from wood smoke. And that's about the biggest single category in the entire kind of pie. There's other things. If we look at the daily pattern, you can actually see how the levels go up and down in one day. And I'll show you in a minute what that looks like, and that helps kind of points to wood smoke maybe being the source. And then also seasonal fluctuations, so when we have our highest events throughout the year. So this is a snapshot of one day, kind of a day in the life of PM 2.5, and on the left, that's starting in the morning, so that's about, that would be 1 a.m., and we're moving throughout the day as we go right. And this pattern is really consistent with other communities who rely a lot on wood smoke. And what it shows is we have kind of a little bump in the morning, in between 6 and 8 a.m., and that's often when people will make a small fire to heat their home back up in the morning. And then it dips throughout the day. And then we see a really strong spike that starts about 4:30 and continues through the evening. And again, that's people getting their house warm for the evening and warm enough to carry through the night. A lot of people will kind of feed the fire right before bed, put the dampers on low so it has a nice kind of slow burn through the evening and keeps the house comfortable. So again, we can look at a graph like this for every single day. This is just one example that's pretty typical for the winter time. So I also mentioned kind of the annual, what it looks like on a yearly basis. So in this chart on the left is the month of January, and as we go through the year, as we move to the right, we're going through the calendar year. And you'll see the kind of peaks happen at the beginning and end, so in January, February, and then in November, December. And this, what this is charting is our air quality index, which is based on our PM 2.5 levels. And if you look closely, you'll see different colored cutoffs, and those correlate to kind of our public health concern, how concerned we are with the air. So the first cutoff is yellow, and that's moderate, and that's telling us, okay, we should probably be watching this to make sure the community knows if it's going to get worse. The next level is that orange, and that's unhealthy for sensitive groups. So Chris mentioned people who have existing cardiovascular or respiratory issues. Children and older adults in general tend to be more vulnerable to air pollution issues. And then the next one is red, and that is, purple. Sorry, I messed up on the colors. But the top one is unhealthy in general, and we very rarely get to that level. But you can see there was once in 2013. But again, the point of this graph is to show you that the kind of peaks that happen in wintertime. And again, that's when people heat their homes with wood. Not many folks fire with a wood stove in the hottest of summer days. I also wanted to mention that you see the peaks. The peaks often correlate to air inversions. So air inversions are this climatological event when you have cold air kind of down on the valley floor, and then a warm system will move in over it and trap the colder air. And this does two things. When the trapped air, when the air that's trapped is cold, we burn more because we're cold. But again, the pollution can't escape because it's stuck in this cold air inversion. So what we see is oftentimes in Washington County we'll have inversion episodes that last a day to a few days, and you'll see the levels start to creep up as the particle pollution has nowhere to go. And again, you'll oftentimes in this annual pattern see those spikes are at the same time as when we have those cold air inversions. So I also want to talk just briefly about some of the things that make this issue, some unique factors in Washington County around this issue. Because like Chris mentioned, there's communities around the state, Oak Ridge, Lakeview, Klamath Falls, that rely heavily on wood smoke, and they've been, some of them have been successful at dealing with this. So the first one is geography. The next is Washington County, as many of you know, has changed a lot in the last 20 to 30 years. And that's resulted in a kind of a patchwork of different policies that impact this particular issue, which is confusing, can be confusing for people. And then the third one is varying levels of access to an alternative. So if you don't want me to burn wood, how do you want me to heat my home? So again, the first is just geography, and this is just a map, a topographical map of the valley, basically, and you can see Hillsborough, Cornelius, and Forest Grove in particular sit at the very kind of lowest points of the valley. And that basically just means we are even more prone to those wintry inversions, when the air gets stuck and stagnant, because the geography prevents it from kind of flushing out, prevents it from good ventilation. So we're kind of predisposed to have those events in the winter. The next one I mentioned is differences in policies. So this is a map of the Portland metro area. And over 20 years ago, the Department of Environmental Quality created a backyard burning ban for anyone that lives within this red line. The problem is, like I mentioned, is Washington County has grown a lot in the last 20 years and grown beyond where this original red line was. So some communities, like in the city of Hillsborough, where you've seen a lot of density move in, there's still open burning allowed. And particularly if you live right on the line, that can be confusing to understand if you're kind of held to a different standard than your neighbor across the street. And again, that just makes it challenging for public health to kind of communicate, the right thing to do. People want to know when they can and can't burn, when they, how to do the right thing. And then again, the last thing is varying access to alternatives. So, frankly, burning wood, it can be the best choice for some people if they are struggling to pay their utility bill and electric heat isn't a good option, or if they don't have access to natural gas to where they live, or if they have a lot of cheap and easy access to firewood, and it keeps their house warm. So again, in terms of trying to figure out, as a community, how we lower these levels, I think we have to think about solutions that are really responsive to people who have limited choices. All right, so that was kind of a bunch of data and charts showing kind of what the issue looks like in Washington County. I mentioned that last summer was really when the health department, the public health division, kind of learned about the issue. So last year was our first kind of inaugural year of working on this issue with the community. And we really focused on outreach and education to people, because this is not a well-known issue. And we really focused on getting people connected to the good sources of information. And the picture here is of a door hanger, and we brought some in the back, and please feel free to grab one. But this door hanger basically lets people know about the issue, kind of why it matters from a health perspective, and also encourages you to sign up for public alerts, which I encourage you all to do also. We're really looking to use the public alert system to let people know when the air quality is getting really bad, so you can do what you need to do. And the other thing we're doing is, for people who have a choice, we're really encouraging those folks to limit burning wood on those really bad days when we have those air inversion days. Obviously, if wood is your only source of heat, we're not asking people to have a cold home. But for folks who have a choice, that's kind of where we're aimed at. So that was 2014. I forgot to mention when we were looking at the annual chart, and we all know this, 2014 was an incredibly mild winter, which is good for air quality because we didn't have to fire up the wood stoves as often. So when we have those really, and that was the case for 2012 when you saw the level go way down, is the weather patterns from year to year can have a huge influence over what our final average looks like. So the other thing that we started last year was a Washington County air quality website, and I can give this all to you later, but it's co.washington.or.us/air, and we can get that all out to you. And what the website does is it's kind of a one-stop shop. It shows you what the air is looking like today. Is it that green, yellow, or dangerous level? And it also gives folks tips on how to burn cleaner, which is a really important part of this issue. Is you can have the brand new certified brand new wood stove, but if you're not building the fire in the best way, you can still be highly polluting. And that's partly what makes pellet stoves so much cleaner, is they kind of take the user out of the equation. They're kind of automated and they feed the fire when they need to, and also that those pellets are cleaner burning. But if you burn your fire the right way, kind of burn small, hot fires, maximize, you want to see as much flame as you can, that means you're burning a really clean fire and you're emitting much less of those particles. And we have information on the website that kind of talks about practices that can help you burn wise or burn clean. So moving forward, this is kind of our game plan moving into the future. We're really interested in continuing and increasing our community engagement. So like I said, this is kind of a new area of work for Washington County, but we also feel like because we're the local government, we're well situated to work directly with community groups on this issue. So we're really interested in doing more presentations like this and kind of sharing the what's going on in the community with folks, so we can hear how people want to address it. What's the best way? What are the best things Washington County can do? Like most public health issues, they're complex and they touch a lot of different people and a lot of different organizations, and that's usually the best way to come up with solutions, is to be working with those people and organizations. So we're really interested in kind of working with everyone else to figure out what makes sense for Washington County. Each of these communities, Oak Ridge, Klamath Falls, they've kind of developed their own strategies, but I think we want to know what works for us. The third one is we're exploring launching a wood stove change-out program. So like Chris mentioned, some of the older wood stoves, they can be much more highly polluting than the newer ones, or than different alternatives like an electric ductless heat pump or a pellet stove or something like that. And we're interested in supporting people who want to make that change. In public health, we talk a lot about the determinants of health. What determines our health and the type of life we get to live. And obviously, air quality is a huge one. The quality of the air impacts our health, but so does having a warm house at night. And I think this is where these programs can be helpful. Is we want to keep people warm, but in a way that also improves the air. So what wood stove change out programs mean is sometimes offering an incentive or helping to pay for a new appliance for people who need that help, to support them in that transition. And then the fourth one is by the fall we really want the message to get out there to everyone to check before you burn. So we have all of these websites and everything else that tells you what the air quality looks like. And we want people to start going to those and looking, what does the air quality look like? It's green, Like you should feel fine firing up the wood stove if you need to. If it's yellow or red, that's when you start to think about alternatives, and that's kind of the message we really like to deliver to people. And that's where the public alerts can be really helpful, is when we get to really dangerous levels, we don't need to rely on you coming to us. We can send the message out to you that we're experiencing really poor air quality. And then finally, what you can do, and we've kind of touched on all of these so far, so that's if you can avoid burning wood on those really poor air quality days, you can, if you have other options, switching to the other heating appliance. Only burn dry seasoned wood, so that's really key at burning a cleaner fire. Basically relies on really dry and well seasoned wood. And then again, signing up for the public alerts so we can give you helpful information. So that's all I have today. I don't have cards, but here's my contact information, and I'm happy to follow up also if we don't get to your question in the Q&A session, to chat with you personally. So, thanks.
Thank you, Matt. And really terrific. Before we could get our video tech specialist here, you managed to work that out. Cool. Ladies and gentlemen, now's the time for questions. We have about 15 minutes or so, and again, both I believe people have indicated that they'll hang out if we don't have time for all of your questions. So remember to tip. And ladies and gentlemen, please line up for questions. And Chris and Matt, if you'd like to stand up here. And just want to acknowledge John, who's also with Washington County Public Health. You'll wave. He's here to support and maybe handle the most difficult questions that these guys can't. I just set you up, John.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much. Very informative. And we talked. Oh, not on. Let's see. Is there a?
You have such a good voice, though.
Can everybody hear me anyway, or is that better?
Let's just. There you go. You got me.
Okay. There we go. That's much better. Public health obviously is the root of the problem, but because it's such a big issue, it's also an economic development issue, as I understand it. Is there a point at which this could get bad enough, given we've already exceeded the 24-hour thresholds, that there could be a legal limit on our ability to grow our businesses and our jobs?
So Chris mentioned the national ambient air quality standards, and again, that's the law, the kind of federal standard that we have to follow. And if your 3-year rolling average eventually exceeds that benchmark, that kind of raises the alarms to the Environmental Protection Agency. And what the next step looks like varies a lot between communities. So the first step in the process is for them to even determine if they want to formally declare the area as a non-attainment. Chris showed a map with gray triangles, I think, are the ones that have exceeded the standard, but EPA for now is just watching them. And one of the reasons, I think this is what I'm proud of about Washington County, is a lot of communities wait until we've hit that limit and there are consequences for industry and more stricter policies. They wait until that point to kind of figure out what we want to do. Washington County has been pretty proactive in kind of let's figure out how we want to improve the air now so we don't get to that level. And so in terms of the economic development consequences, that's kind of the big unknown, and it looks quite different depending on where you end up. If you get above that threshold, EPA will look more closely trying to figure out kind of what the sources of the pollution are, and that informs how they want you as a local community to move forward.
Chris Leslie, board member. Glad you're both here. I'm always interested in smoke. I have a nice fireplace and I understand. But you're telling us the problems. What are your solutions? Do you have any solutions for, especially older people I know have trouble breathing sometimes? I recommend something, but I'm interested in your solutions.
So, Chris, are you asking if the air quality is bad? What is
How
this?
to improve it in the house or where you're at.
Yeah, so, well, one thing, it can always help to actually open a window and get some air moving through your home. In fact, that's just a general best practice, whether you think the air quality is bad or not. So getting some air moving through your home. But this is the issue, right? None of us can stop breathing. You can go for 2 minutes and you'll have brain damage. And so the issue here is that we actually, this is public health, right? We have to take the steps in our community, all of us together, to reduce the air pollution to a level that's not harmful. Otherwise, there's really not a whole lot you can do to keep yourself from the harm. Although I think you had a possible solution.
I had 2 friends on oxygen tanks, carrying them around, and as soon as they got air cleaners, they didn't need the tanks.
Yeah.
So I strongly suggest having an air cleaner, though it's economical for people. Matt?
Yeah, I think that that is the key question that you asked, and I think from a personal, kind of an individual standpoint, you're bringing up the right things. You can take all the steps to kind of clean your immediate environment, whether that's through air filters or venting your home. But I think the challenge that we're facing is, as a community, how do we clean up the air? And
showing air pollutants to be related to the incidence of cancer, particularly breast cancer.
I will look for local studies, because obviously that's what's probably most interesting. Generally speaking, there's a lot of literature about the link between air pollution and cancer. I think one of the things that makes it challenging is we live in a world where we don't breathe one air pollutant at a time. And when it comes to these types of studies, that's generally what they aim to do, is isolate the health effect of one pollutant at a time. But we breathe a slurry of air pollutants that changes even throughout our day. Even, the types of pollutants we might be breathing in our home compared to our commute to work, to the pollutants at where you work, depending on where you work. So I think that's what makes it challenging. But I will get your information, and I will follow up on anything that's Oregon specific and send it your way so you have a better answer.
And I would add to that, so when we think about something like cancer, we know there's genetics and other things that are factors that we can't control, but what we want to do is control those factors that are controllable, and that's what public health is all about. And Matt is absolutely right that as you go through your daytime, you are exposed to toxics in the products that you use, in the air, and those are not only additive, but they can be synergistic. So Oregon Environmental Council, for example, is working on a bill in the legislature related to toxics in children's products. And our opposition says, well, this toxic chemical in this single toy doesn't harm. But what we're looking at is when you add this and that, there's this much greater potential for harm. So that was a great question.
Yeah, I heard a lot of interesting factual statements made, including the statement that all combustion creates pollution. What happens when hydrogen is burned?
So you're right that hydrogen is, I believe it creates water.
Correct.
Right.
And I'll give you a hypothetical.
Keep going.
Just
A man who lived in Los Angeles County in the 60s and 70s, worked as a letter carrier for 14 years. How long will he live?
Is it a joke?
No, it's not a joke.
How long will, repeat the question?
A man who's lived in the Los Angeles basin for 30 years, including the 1960s and the 1970s, 14 of which was as a letter carrier, and I don't mean driving a truck, walking. How long will the man live?
So there is no way to say that any single person is going to, I think what you're getting at here is that air pollution is not going to kill everybody, but there is, there is a, what we're looking at is in a population, you're going to have a certain number of individuals who will be impacted by that pollution.
Oh, so you couldn't give me a number on the length of his lifespan?
No.
Thank you.
Emily, chamber member. Is there any sort of a filter someone who must burn wood could put on their chimneys to affect the air quality of the air being discharged? And could that be regulated?
Yeah, so I'm not aware of any kind of like something that you would just pop on the top that would be the, you know, kind of the fix-all. But fortunately, I think kind of, you know, minor practices in the fire that you're building and the oxygen supply you're giving it, that actually makes a huge difference in what, kind of reducing that particulate load.
Still a concern of the indoor air quality too, though.
Right.
Residents.
Right.
Because again, we're not just looking at what we're doing to the atmosphere and outdoor. We're also concerned, public health wise, for the indoor air quality and what you've been exposed to. So we're not just wanting to make these changes or speak to you to make sure that we meet this air quality. We really want you to have the best quality of life, and part of that is yes, what's going on outside, but what is affecting your health indoors.
Chris Leslie, board member, second bite again. I was reading where smoke is mostly potassium, which is good for enriching the soil, like the volcanoes blow up and the ash restores potassium to the earth. What is the actual definition of particulates? Is that like 2.5% or what the hell does it mean?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So when we were talking about particulate or PM 2.5, 2.5 refers to the size, so it's 2.5 microns or smaller. It's basically a catch-all for a variety of different things that are that size. It's more of a, I would say, a classification of a size that different chemicals and particles come in, not necessarily the definition of one substance.
No dance.
The dance party
No
begins.
dance.
John Williams, board member. I was interested when you were talking about if you have an old wood stove that you had for a long time, new ones have come out. I didn't hear anything about how you go about doing that in the event that you wanted to make that. Do you contact somebody to contact, or do you go to dealers, or is there some kind of a deal if you make that change that maybe you get so much off, or something of that nature, so that it makes it easier for you to want to make that change?
Yeah, great. That's a great question. So yes, the first answer is you go to the dealer, like you said. Any retailer that's selling wood stoves will have these EPA certified wood stoves. There's a variety of different kind of incentive programs, like you mentioned. I'm familiar with there's a $300 residential energy tax credit that's out there. And when I mentioned Washington County is looking at a new program, those are the types of questions we're wrestling with right now, is what type of incentive is helpful for people. And so Unfortunately, I don't have a Washington County specific program to send you to yet, but if and when we do have one, we're going to work our hardest to make sure every person who has a wood stove finds out about it, because generally that's how they work, is supporting people through money to kind of make that change out. But yeah, these retailers, wood stove retailers are the experts in the appliances, and they can speak a lot about the various models and how efficient they are.
Matt, Chris, thank you very much. We all appreciate you being here and handling some of the tougher questions. Thanks so much, and thanks, John, for backup. Ladies and gentlemen, as we close the program for today, let me again remind you about tipping. I don't even know that I need to. I think everybody here tips pretty well, but gosh, we really do appreciate the way the restaurant works with us. And folks, next week we have Stephen Nagy with the Port of Portland, Airports Manager, and he'll be talking about what's going on and what's new at the Hillsborough Airport. Again, thank you very much. Remember, we have a matching grant, but I'm not going to speak too much about that because I think you all know, and you know how to find the treasure. Thanks, folks. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. I greatly appreciate it. I needed this. I talked to Troy a lot. I needed the whole load at once.